listening to The Photography Pod, a show for both working professionals and enthusiast photographers alike. And here's your hosts, Steve Vaughan and Nick Church.
Hello again and welcome to The Photography Pod, a photography podcast for both working professionals and enthusiast photographers alike. My name is Steve Vaughan and once again I'm here with my mate, Nick Church. Nick, how are you?
Very well, Steve. How are you?
Cold.
Yeah, we got lots of snow in
winter's arrived, didn't it? Yeah.
North Somerset. So yeah, very much so. Like, you know, freezing hands, holding cold light stands today in a shoot. And I thought, I've just remembered why I hate this time of year for photography.
So what was your shoot today? What were you doing?
It was a local supplier of gym equipment. They supply gyms and things with weights and of all different types. They've all got different names, and I'm not a gym goer, so but racks and everything else. So I've done shoots with them before, and This was quite nice because they had a fitness instructor and model coming in to do some shots. So I had some nice. That's what I was holding light stands around, so I have more light than I normally would use. But yeah, it was good.
Fun. Well, I'm in my little office that used to be a garage, and the heater's got two settings here: cold or nuclear hot. It's a digital radiator in this room. I can't get it right. So I'm either freezing my so-and-sos as I am now, or alternatively, I'll be just sitting here with no clothes on, and you definitely don't want to see that.
This is quite good, because I found through when we did the episodes in the late summer, I was getting really hot. You know, once you start recording, I can be normal temperature. As soon as that red light comes on, my temperature increases. And I'm sure that first episode, you can see me get redder and redder throughout the episode.
We're definitely not going to start doing new podcasts, though. That's not what our listeners want to hear about, I'm sure. So no guests this week. It's just Nick and I. We've got a few things we're going to talk about. We're going to look at camera systems. So we're going to go through our vast knowledge of different camera systems and the pros and cons thereof. I'm exaggerating when I say our vast knowledge there. Also want to look at monitors for Apple, because there are two new monitors coming out, which I've just been made aware of. And I think a lot of people get confused about Apple and the way they work with non-Apple monitors. So I think it's worth exploring that, because I use both Apple and PC.
Okay.
We've got some new stuff from Sony that's been launched today, literally today. So I think there's something we can talk about there. And I also do have a book as well. And I finally got around to watching Lee last night as well. So we can talk about that.
I look forward to hearing that.
But what I thought we'd start with, Nick, is, you know, we've got new listeners who've started listening to the podcast over the last few weeks. And thanks very much for doing so, guys. But perhaps they don't really know so much about who we are. So I think it might just be worth, as a starting point, just recapping a little bit about who we are and, you know, our journey into photography. That isn't too much of a cliche. So great to start with you, because I guess you've been a photographer a bit less than myself, but then I am far older than you, as I always.
You always say that, but I think it's a lot less than that would imply. But yeah, just to reiterate what you said there, Steve, massive thank you to people that are downloading the episodes. We really appreciate it. That's why we do this, right? It's not, you know, because Steve and I could just get on the phone and chat nonsense. But we really want to sort of, you know, we really love to sort of bring industry news and bring these photographers that we're interviewing to as many people as possible. And to add on to that, if there are people that you think, you know, other photographers, if you're listening and there's other photographers that you think would enjoy the pod, please do share the link to the Photography Pod Facebook group and the show itself, so that they can subscribe. And that's great. And that the more people that we have, it just gives us, you know, more and more impetus to get more and more guests on. And we've got some fantastic guests coming up in the next few weeks, actually.
We have, and we should cover that before we finish today.
But anyway, good shout. So people that are new to listening, so anyway, listeners that haven't sort of listened to the first couple of episodes, my name's Nick Church, and I am a wedding and commercial photographer. I do films as well, but a bit like Steve, actually sort of more predominantly in the photography side, and films is an add-on. And typically I'll use filmmakers to do the films if I'm shooting wedding films or whatever. I also do a suite of education programs as well, from more in the professional side. I do a couple of beginner courses, but it's usually sort of around Flash or career development, like business coaching or wedding photography, business coaching and that kind of thing. So the weddings and the commercial stuff and the coaching is a really lovely sort of suite of variety, and I really thrive on the variety of that. And this is another aspect of that, just something completely different, out of my comfort zone, in front of a camera. Although, you know, a lot of people are listening, not watching, but you know, YouTube is around the corner, so we will be doing that as well. And it's just, having that variety and having this forum to sort of have a chat with you, Steve, and chat to loads of photographers that I'm that half of them wouldn't return my emails if it wasn't for this. So it's a really good opportunity to do that.
Love it.
Anyway, what about you? Let's have your background.
Yeah, sure. So, how long have you got, really? I'm a scientist by background. So a long time ago, I got a degree in chemistry from the University of Birmingham, and not a great degree. I got an Archbishop Desmond, if you know what that is, a 2-2. And I worked as a research chemist for a couple of years. Got bored with that, and then decided I wanted to be a salesman to sell lab equipment. So I spent 20 odd years selling lab equipment to scientists around the UK and actually in the States. We lived in the States for 3 years as well. So pharmaceutical companies, universities, all that kind of stuff. But I'd always been into photography. And when my daughter was born, which is like 30 plus years ago now, it was an excuse to buy a camera in the film days. And I set up a dark room in my mother's cellar. I used to go and see my mother and disappear down a cellar for 5 hours, which didn't make me particularly popular with my mother at the time.
Hey, a visit's a visit, surely.
Well, true. Hey, Mom, see you later. And being a scientist, I love the whole chemistry of film and everything. We did the show with Geraint, and remember, I actually loved hearing about his whole process about that. You can listen to that one back on the podcast, dear listener, if you haven't heard that one, the one with Geraint Roberts about film. But I guess I worked my way up in industry, and about 12 years ago, I was working for a big American corporate and doing quite a big job. In fact, I had 2 jobs for them, and it made me ill. I had a breakdown with it all, really. And we'd done a few weddings on the side, and it was a bit of fun, really, because my wife, Sam, got into photography. She's an artist. So we had this idea, why don't we ever go being wedding photographers? And it was always going to be the 2 of us, because we just used, we've always worked together. I was actually Sam's boss where we met in the corporate world, but that's another story for another day. And it just kind of took off, really. And over the last sort of 12 years, at times it's been my job, at times it's been Sam's job. I found I could find another way of making a living during lockdown, because obviously all the weddings stopped. We had 52 weddings planned that year, and we actually did 4, I think. And because of my background in sales, I reached out to people I knew who had sales teams and said, that sales team you got stuck at home during lockdown, I've got this cool thing called Zoom. How about if I do some training for you? And it kind of took off, and that's now become a big business in its own right for me, really. So as much as we love being photographers, we've made the decision that over the next couple of years, we're going to wind our photography down, because I am the wrong side of 60 in all seriousness. And I'm not quite ready to retire yet. So probably the next 3 or 4 years, we'll be focusing more on my training business, which is corporate sales, But I love being a photographer. I want to put something back into the photography world, which is why I like doing this, really. We've photographed 450 weddings, Nick, we reckon, the other day. And we're very proud of the fact that we don't think we've had a single complaint in that time. Nobody's ever.
Have you checked your spam folder?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. There's loads we never heard from again. No, but yeah, and that goes down to Sam, really, because she's just, as well as being a great photographer, she's just a great extra bridesmaid, and the brides love her and her maternal approach, really. So we've had a great ride on it. We've not been rich on the back of it. We're not celebrity photographers. We don't have 1 million Instagram followers. I've never been really interested in that, really. It's all been really delivering a great experience for our customers, which I know sounds cliche, but we're proud of that, really.
No, I think it is. That's what it's all about, almost, weddings, isn't it? I think doing both commercial and weddings, you see that the difference there really clearly. That commercial, you expect to be professional, of course. It, depending on the setting, but usually it's a professional type setting. But it's all about the image quality at the end of the day. That's what they're investing in. A wedding is a very different thing, because they're having a real human person that's going to be there all day long on a really important day that fits in with their guests, and each wedding's got its own vibe, and what the sort of vibe that you bring to one wedding might be totally different to another one, and that takes a bit of practice and there's a skill there, and a one size fits all photographer, I think, does find it quite hard in a lot of different weddings.
I think that's right. And I think it always amazes me how many wedding photographers don't seem to like people. We're generally interested in talking to people, meeting nice people. Otherwise, why do you spend 12, 14 hours at other people's weddings every week, really? It's a strange way of making a living if you don't like being around people.
But it's interesting that you said, because I had a similar thing that as I forgot to say about before photography, I had a career in the software industry, and it seems that, and this went up until 2015 when I started taking photos, so I was really late to the game, really. But it's strange in our, I don't know, this country or just our Western society, that when you're doing a professional type job or any job really, the expectation is that you do it for a certain length of time, and then you start having more and more responsibility, more and more people management.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so I used to love creating software, writing software, operating systems, writing architectures, and basically got promoted into a job that I hated.
Yeah.
Because it was none of the stuff that I was doing that I loved to do. It was the stuff that was recruiting and firing people and all that stuff. And it's so easy. I don't know why we do this. Rather than keeping our best people doing what they love to do and they do it really well, employ a manager. If you need a manager, employ managers, because there'll be tons better managers than I was.
Absolutely.
It's just a really, really odd thing. But yeah, and then I got to a point where I thought, right, I'm going to have to, weddings had grown. I thought I'm going to have to decide what to do. And I thought, well, I love doing weddings. And at the moment, I hate doing my day job. So it wasn't much of a, I thought, why not? And age does come into it. You think, well, if I don't do it, if it's not now, then when? It's that aspect to it as well. I thought, it's not, if I was 20, I could say, well, I'll do it in 10 years' time. But I want to let's just do it.
I think if I was 20 and starting off as a full-time wedding photographer, I'd be worried about the long-term viability of my career, because I think in 20 years' time, I can't see we would have wedding photographers, not in the way that we know them now.
Possibly,
I think in 10 years' time, it's going to be difficult because of the way technology is moving on. But back to what you said, back to my experiences, I love being in front of customers, and yet the better you are at that, the more you get promoted. And I think in my last year in the corporate world, in 6 months, I never spoke to a single customer, and I'm a sales director. I just hate it. So anyway, that's who we are, dear listener. I hope we haven't bored you too much on that, but we just thought it might be worth putting a bit of context around ourselves and why we think we're reasonably qualified to talk about photography. And we also know a fair bit about the industries that we work in. So
I think that industry side is a useful aspect of this podcast.
Yeah.
And just general, I'm sure you're probably the same, that without your non-photography career, I'm sure you couldn't have spun pretty quickly and started up a photography business so fast.
No, exactly,
and I know that starting a business for me, that was matching my salary in like 18 months is, I know I wouldn't be able to done that. So even though I glass half empty thinking, I should have done this when I was 20, my parents didn't let me do photography at school. They were absolutely against it, or art or anything. They wanted me to do science. But if I had, I think it would have been difficult, because you don't have those skills about branding and marketing and selling.
Absolutely.
And that does come with experience.
But as I tell people I speak to starting off in the photography business, it's 80% not photography, it's 80% business. As you say, it's marketing, branding, selling, dare I say. People have a dirty impression of the word selling, but we have to be salespeople. Anybody who runs their own business has to be a salesperson. And I'm good at that, obviously. That's how we've been able to, make a comfortable living out of it. As I say, it's not, we've never aspired to be turning over $500,000 or whatever a year, but it's paid. Well, it's currently paying Sam's salary. It's also paying a pension. It's also paying nice dividends for me, and that's kind of pretty much all we wanted to do at this stage, really. So,
absolutely.
So let's move on and look at gear. So something that always is popular on a podcast, and we're going to look a little bit about camera systems. And I guess I do have a bit of an edge on you on this one, because I've been around cameras for 30 odd years, really, and yourself perhaps a bit less, really. But we're both
my experience
shooters, aren't we?
is just based on from a beginning in Nikon DSLR, going to Sony with the A7 III, and I've been Sony ever since. And so, so I'm fairly limited in that. But it is an interesting time, isn't it, Steve? For if somebody is looking for a professional camera system or looking to buy a professional camera body at the moment, then we've got so many options with the A1, the Sony A1 version 2, Mark II, which has been launched today. The A9 Mark III.
Yep.
Is that launched? Is that?
Oh yeah, no, I know people have got them.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that's just two fantastic camera systems, sort of leading kind of sort of range topping brands there. And I think there's the Canon R1 that's due at some point, and the Z9 version 2 as well. So the Nikon, so there are loads of really interesting stuff around.
There are,
What are you shooting at the moment, Steve?
So we're Sony. We've been Sony since 2020. So our journey, our first professional cameras were Canon DSLRs, 5D Mark IIIs. Dallied with Nikon for a while, and then we had a D800 for a while, and it was such a loud camera. We very quickly ditched that. But we really made our name with the back of Fujifilm cameras, mainly through making them work or being determined to make them work. So I've mentioned on this podcast before, very much, inspired by the work of Kevin Mullins, who's a good friend of ours, and at the time was a Fuji ambassador. And I'd bought an X Pro 1 about 10 years ago now. I bought it for me as a fun camera because I like the look of it, rangefinder style and a couple of lenses. And I really like using it, and I hate using the DSLRs. They're big and heavy and noisy. And I said to Sam one day, I wonder if we could shoot weddings with these. And the XT1 came out about that time, which was the first of the sort of mini DSLR version, cameras. And they were slow to focus, and they were only 16 meg, but they were just great to use. And it suited our style, being mostly documentary photographers at the time. So we went all Fuji. So for pretty much 6 years, we used Fujifilm cameras and everything we did, really. And love being part of the community. We spoke about this on a previous episode, but they do have a great community, which comes very much from Japan, but also the UK guys as well. And it was fun, but there were some annoyances, mainly around. So I'm the technical nerdy photographer. Sam's the creative artistic one. She wouldn't mind me saying that she's not a technical photographer. So she would get annoyed with focusing issues, particularly in low light. She would get annoyed with the noise of raw files, above 3200 or so. Even this was before perhaps some of the more modern software approaches to that, really. So we sort of toyed about the idea of possibly going Sony, and got teased relentlessly about that because there's I don't know what it is, but I think because Sony is a mega corporation. Have you had this feeling? But because they are, electronics, film, TV, and they do cameras as well. It's like, well, they're not a proper camera company. Nikon is, because that's all they do, which isn't true.
Yeah, well, it's always, it was always, people talked about a computer inside a camera-shaped body, and that kind of thing. But that's the same with all Nikon, and, but people do, and certainly did, when I first went to Sony, have that opinion over Nikon and Canon, that it is a bit more of a, doesn't have much of a soul. And
but what does that mean? What does
exactly
soul mean?
Exactly. If you press the button and the thing happens, I mean, it's completely psychological, I'm sure. I think the things like Fuji, with the design, the physical design of them, which they're beautifully designed products.
Oh, gorgeous, yeah.
And I think that is some, and the colors with the JPEG, built in, color science into so the JPEGs. I think that is something that does offer something quite different. I can see why people go for that. I don't think out of the box they're I think you said it right, that you can make it work for a wedding. But it's not been designed necessarily just to do that. It's got other, more.
Well, I think the newer ones are better, aren't they? But you're right. Yeah.
And I had a similar thing with Olympus when I had Olympus system before I really sort of started doing photography professionally. Okay. It was Olympus, and that was very much the same thing as I can make this work. It's focusing's a little bit annoying, and even with my limited experience, I could see surely it should focus better than this. And this was the EM5. So it wasn't like the.
So why did you go Olympus then? What was the thinking? Because you'd had was that the first camera you'd had? Or?
Yeah, it was the first sort of camera that wasn't a phone. So it was something that was small that I could carry around. I wasn't thinking that I'd be shooting weddings. And when I first got my wedding booking and I was still using this Olympus, I thought, should I use that for a wedding? And then it was only that I thought, I wonder if people think I look a bit ridiculous holding something so small. And so I sold it and got a Nikon. A bigger system, and it was purely to do with that. I did find it frustrating with the image noise, so there was that aspect of it. So I thought, well, I can't shoot in dark. But then you realise that a lot of that is proper camera control. If you use the right, and you actually don't need. It's only when you mess something up that you really dig around in those shadows and bring out that noise, which you tend to get on smaller sensors. So I in fact, when I had been in photography, doing professional photography for a few years, I did buy another Olympus system just to have, because I had to sell it to get the Nikon stuff, just as a sort of callback to the day when that was my only system, and I used it for a bit, and it was a bit of a pain in the arse, to be honest.
Of course, we had Tesley on a few weeks ago, who was an OEM system ambassador, and she was very clear that, for her kind of work, which is wildlife, it's a great system, and the perhaps the sort of drawbacks that you're mentioning now, perhaps less so with the more sensors and things, really.
Or even the drawbacks with the smaller sensor do have advantages for her.
Yeah, of course.
You know, in terms of size, lumping kit around, getting the extra reach with a fairly small lens. There are some good things, but maybe not for weddings necessarily, which is why you don't see that many Olympus wedding photographers, I guess, or OEM system. I guess so. Yeah. I
think if I was starting out now and starting from fresh, and I had, I don't know, 20 grand to spend, say, let's imagine I got made redundant and I could go and spend that kind of money on. I mean, it would have been, when I started, it would have been Canon or Nikon. That was the only choice. Now I think it's Canon, Nikon, and Sony are the three main choices, really. I think in terms of the thought processes I'd go through, it would be, what is it I want to do? Is it only ever going to be weddings? Do I want to do video as well? And I think that adds an extra complexity as well.
Yeah.
I think the thing that would put me off Canon as a new user is the lenses. The lens prices just seem outrageous, really, for their RF lenses.
Mm-hmm.
And they've took a policy, and I understand it from a marketing and a business strategy point of view, where they've not opened up the RF mount officially to anybody apart from their crop sensor cameras.
Yeah.
So Sigma are now making APS-C size lenses, but if you've got a full frame Canon mirrorless camera, there's nobody making official RF lenses apart from Canon, so they can charge what they want, really. And I think, to me, that comes across a bit arrogant. Is that perhaps a bit?
It's
so
a
if I got
decision.
a bag full of Canon lenses that I could adapt, EF lenses, then I get it clearly. Yeah.
But I had a client in doing some coaching on professional photography, and she had a R5, R6, I don't know what it was exactly, but same problem, that she had lots of Canon lenses from her old camera system, so couldn't justify, especially at the start of your career, you can't justify splashing out on a load of R-mount lenses. Is it R-mount?
For the Canon system, RF.
No, yeah. So she had an adapter.
Yeah,
and it wasn't great. That adapter, so those lenses, she did have one native lens, I think it might have been the kit lens, but a native RF mount lens, lightning fast with focusing. When in a studio environment where it's darker, where any of the adapted lenses were really struggling to focus.
It is interesting, yeah. I've got a friend who I was doing a bit of business coaching for recently, who did actually get married and started to become a photographer, but to do headshots. And he was a Fuji shooter, and he decided to go Canon, but he bought EF lenses and adapters as a way of getting into that system, really. And, if I was a sports photographer and I had a bag full of, 600 millimeter EF lenses, then of course it's a no-brainer, because the cost of those lenses is just outrageous. But I think starting from, and, people talk about Canon color science. I don't get that. To me, I think a modern camera, you can make it look like whatever you want, really, if you know what you're doing. Is that what am I?
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't. I went from Nikon to Sony. I've had second shooters shooting Canon. They all look pretty similar to me. I honestly don't think, I think, and it doesn't really make sense that there is that much difference between them. Certainly nothing that can be not corrected in Lightroom anyway.
No.
Sure, JPEGs, creating JPEGs, that does burn in a certain look, course, and that's totally different. But
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think they've always been the market leader. They probably still are the market leader, although I think Sony would argue they're the market leader in mirrorless cameras. But it's just this sort of high entry level that they give you now, unless you're willing to splash out on lots and lots of RF lenses, really, and stomach the cost of it, really. So I'm not sure I'd go Canon. I think I'd probably look seriously at Nikon. I think they've really got their game right together in the last few years, because they were, like Canon, slow to get on board with the mirrorless train, really. And for a while, I think they struggled, really. But their new cameras seem amazing. Yeah,
well, their early mirrorless systems were not really fit for purpose, were they? But certainly anytime I have clients in that have got a Canon, a Nikon mirrorless, full frame, or otherwise, I really like them. I think they do feel really solid, rugged, well put together, logically laid out. And when you have to dig around in menus because you're trying to show someone how to do something, so normally with Flash or something, it's pretty logical how to do it. When I go into Canon, I'm all over the place. I've got not a clue. It looks like I'm a toddler going through a menu system trying to find it. I'm reading everything. And but I think you'd have to. You'd be difficult to do anything other than, logically, Sony has got to be a pretty solid platform to get onto. If you don't have a background in it with Canon or Nikon, and you're coming to photography today, then in terms of the sheer number of lenses, then I think Sony's got a very compelling sort of platform.
I think trying to be objective about it, I think you're absolutely right. So, we didn't make a big decision about it in 2020 because Canon and Nikon didn't really have mirrorless systems to shout about then. And we were absolutely wedded to mirrors. There's no way we'd go back to DSLRs. And we wanted to improve focus accuracy, particularly for Sam, and Sony was, and probably still is, the best AF system around, really. And as you say now, there's so many lenses to choose from. So we bought originally the little original Sony lenses, not the Zeiss ones, but like the 35-1.8, the 85-1.8, and they're great little lenses. Yeah, and you pick them up for 350 quid. Yeah,
really good. I shot. In fact, I did a wedding a few years ago in the centre of Bristol, and I took the 1.8 85 and the 1.8 35, and absolutely fine.
That's all you need.
It's certainly any difference between those and the GM lenses that I tend to use would be in my eyes, not in any client's eyes. I'm not shooting at 1.4.
Yeah,
so.
And of course we had Neil Redfern on last week, and he still uses those.
Yes.
And he's very successful in what he does. I think the thing always about Sony, everybody always said about Sony, was the menu systems, and they were a dog, and they aren't much better, I don't think, frankly.
A bit, yeah, it's a little bit better. At least it's more logically laid out. I mean, that is something that I think Nikon and Canon are just loads better in terms of that. I don't know why that is. I don't know what I suppose it's always they want to. I think with Sony, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If they suddenly change it to a completely different operating system and layout, then everyone's going to be screaming blue murder, saying, "Oh, I can't find this setting." I think probably the case is that Nikon and Canon just had a better menu system years before Sony
probably
doing those cameras, and so they can just keep doing that.
Yeah,
but that if you're coming, I'm actually in a situation at the moment. I've said before on the podcast where I do need to replace my camera bodies. So I've got A7 IV bodies at the moment, and I'll certainly go through probably the first bit next year. But one of them is playing up a little bit, and I don't want to get another one if I'm going to then be So they're probably I think they're ones at 100. They're towards the top end, like they're towards 200K. Shutter actuation, so they're at the point where if I'm going to sell them, I could still get some decent money for them. So get one fixed and then sell that. And so I'd be looking at whether I would really like the A1. I think that is a great camera. It's whether I can justify the cost. Same with the A9 III, whether I can justify the cost, or the A7 V when that emerges next year, presumably at some point, and what that's going to offer. I do certainly. I mean, when we talked to Neil last week about the global shutter. I think that is I do really like the idea of it. I do think it might be a bit overhyped, though. I think
it's a good question. I think it depends on what you're doing and what you're going to use it for, really.
If you're a photographer that takes lots of shots outside when it's bright and use flash, so. Make my Matt Law, so he does almost every shot of a wedding he does throughout, even through the summer. He's getting off-camera flash, and that's his look. Absolutely, I can see why that's a real game changer. I think for the other cases, compared with A7 III/4 type technology, where you can't shoot at all on electronic shutter, but the A1 Mark II, where you can shoot electronic shutter, just but with your limit to I think it's 250 or 400 if you use the shutter, that's fine. If you're not outside, that's absolutely fine, isn't it? And this global shutter, I mean, and the A1 Mark II does have the pre-capture as well, which I thought was a positive side effect of the global shutter, but that they've managed to work out how to do that on a stacked sensor so capturing loads of frames before you start shooting. So if you've missed the moment, then you can go back through and get the images before you started.
I mean, we had Helen Williams and Neil Redfern on last week from they run Flashmasters, as we talked about, and Helen does some fantastic work with high speed sync, outdoors, as you say, and for instance, all her group photos are always flash lit, and she does them fantastically well. And that's where that camera I think does come in, because if you are at if you're trying to use as high shutter speed because you've got a wide open lens for whatever reason, you can, with the Godox things, use high-speed sync, but of course the power drops off radically.
Yeah.
And that's what you don't have.
Lose a stop or two, don't you?
At least, and the rest probably, yeah.
But bear in mind, and this is what I'm thinking. It's a little bit, unless you dive into the detail. If you look at the headlines, sure, global shutter's a win-win. But you look at the detail and think, well, sure, you could ramp up to, because it'd do like 80,000, 1/80,000th of a second, won't it? The A9 III.
Yeah.
But once you're getting above 1,000, then your flash is on, especially when you're outside in daylight, your flash can be full power. So you're looking at what the flashlight's can be on for 400th of a second. Anything over 400th of a second, you're not getting the full flash anyway, because the shutter's
true.
That's a very good point. So what they do with the global shutter is they, if you're up at the sort of thousands range, then you're obviously missing the vast majority of the flashlight. Is they use this timing method to because when flash fires, it starts off, it gets bright very quickly and then tails off. So what they do is make sure when the electronic shutter fires, it does so in the brightest part of the flash,
right?
That curve, to get as much light as possible. And I think when you compare that method, and it sometimes gets it wrong, which is why the global shutter systems do have like a manual timing. You can adjust timing to get that right.
Yeah.
So when you're comparing that global shutter system with high speed sync, then it is loads better, because you can, even though you're only getting a small chunk of that flash in the shutter actuation, you can make sure it's the brightest part of the flash. That combined with the fact you lose a stop or two of high speed sync does mean you can get a lot more power, or get the same power. Because if you're only getting a fragment of the flash, let's say, then you might as well drop down to quarter power. You're still going to get the same amount, because all flashes are the same power. It's just how long they're on for. So it means you can get the same, a brighter flash than HSS would give you at lower flash power. So there are benefits, but all those benefits are for outside shooting, as Helen does, those sorts of shots. It's not something I do that much, very little of that, if any.
No, same here, to be honest. And I guess if I was a sports shooter, that's the other thing for the global shutter, blackout free, sports photography. So to me, that's a camera which is almost like a demonstration of capability. Sony showing what they can do, because Sony have got something like 80% of the sensor market. They own that market. Then obviously Canon are doing their own, but for everybody else, it's pretty much, Fuji, Panasonic, Olympus are all Sony cameras, sensors inside. And I think what they're doing with that particular camera is showing what they can do and what they're going to be able to do as technology moves on, really.
Yeah.
I think in 5 years' time, global shutters will be routine, probably.
I think so. Yeah, I totally agree. I think at the moment with this first one, there is a hit on your dynamic range. So the minimum ISO is sort of 250.
Yeah, I read that, yeah.
Because it's packing the basically, because it's got this secondary sensor that's taking all the data, it's fitting twice as much stuff into the same pixel size, so it's got half the space. So your ISO, you are losing a stop or so of dynamic range. But I guess that in practice, is that going to be noticeable? Probably not. Probably not. It's not like you're struggling wide open outside, because your shutter can go up to 80,000.
Yeah.
So on a Sony, for example, if I was 1.4. and mine would go up to 4,000th of a second, I might be struggling if I was at 250 ISO. So, but it solves that kind of problem. So you're looking at, is it going to be noisier? I think every camera that progresses, every sensor, every bit of software is doing better and better with the image noise.
I think if I was in your situation, you're VAT registered, I'm not, but I'd look at an A1, the current A1, because there's going to be some great deals on that, really. That's still an awesome camera.
True, yeah.
It really is, and even if it was like a stopgap for a couple of years, really, while things settle down a little bit.
The trouble is, Steve, I've got really bad previous of, I start somewhere on let's say it doesn't matter whether it's a guitar, a mountain bike, a motorbike. I think, right, I don't need that. Right, let me start somewhere sensible. It could be a piece of luggage, right? It doesn't matter. So I start low in the range, and then it takes me about 3 days, and I'll just go to the most expensive. I think I could have just gone there and saved myself the time. Go straight there. So I know that's my personality. It's a flaw, and it's an addiction in buying things. I just cannot not go for things. I convince myself that I need that one extra feature. But
there's a whole concept in business. You may have heard of it when you were in business, called Belbin.
Oh, I haven't heard it.
Belbin is your preferred role in a team. It's a guy called Meredith Belbin. He's still alive, I think. And there are about, I think there's 13 different roles that people adapt in a team. And of course, nobody's one thing, but, it's your preferred role. And you are, and I think I am as well, what's known as a resource investigator.
That's very kind.
You would love to go and, if somebody says, can you go and research online on the internet for 2 days, different specs and things, you'd be in your element, and so would I.
Yeah.
So that's what you do there, is being a resource investigator. And what
especially
I'm not...
if I can find some way to create a metric where I can use do some coding, a bit of spreadsheet, bit of coding behind it,
so
and actually produce data that shows that the one's better than the other, even though it's all meaningless. Yeah. Perfect. Even
that's
better.
A specialist behaviour. I'm definitely not what's known as a completer finisher. That's why most of this room and this house is half painted. That's another aside anyway, but it's fascinating. It's
that is interesting.
Yeah, look it up if you get a chance. So, all right, what are the camera brands?
Just to conclude on that, I think you're right that probably the A9 one is probably going to, or A9 II certainly is. For someone like me, be completely sufficient. The A1 version 1 would be completely sufficient too, and I think it just comes down to whether you do. Certainly the A9 III, if you're using loads of outdoor flash, then I think that's a deal breaker. If you're doing loads of video, then the fact that the A9s with the 24 megapixels can't do 8K, then I think probably that would steer you to A1. I think if for people that do very little video, or if they do, 4K is fine. Then that's a.
Do you deliver 4K video then?
Pretty much. Yeah, almost always. Yeah. And it's a struggle on the A7 IV because of the crop factor. If you're doing any slow motion, then that crop factor that it applies, which I still don't trust that it's a hardware limitation, or whether it's just a software, switch inside. It just doesn't work. But then, because there's no point shooting 1 5-second segment in 1080p and have the rest in 4K, you might as well deliver everything in 1080p, then shoot it all in 1080p and save yourself a lot of storage. But but then that said, slow motion, I think it gets a bit cheesy anyway. So I think probably doing less and less slow motion stuff anyway.
Yeah, me too. I tend to shoot in 4K but delivering 1080 at the moment, but I might revisit that. But purely, for the ability to crop if I need to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, other camera systems then. Any experience of using any other type of camera systems in your?
No, not mirrorless. No, literally just Sony A7 III onwards, and before then Nikon D750, which until quite recently I really had a sort of pang to go and invest in a DSLR again. That Nikon, I used to love it, but I'm sure it's rose tinted. If I was to get it, I would think, blimey, why isn't it focusing? What's going wrong?
Why is it going junk? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Why can't I see in the viewfinder the picture properly? Yeah, yeah. No,
so I'm sure it's rose tinted, but it was a great system. It was an absolute workhorse, that camera.
Oh, completely.
I know the D800 is the same. Just you can throw anything at it. And that's the thing that would make me. I think I'm too heavily invested in GM lenses to move away from Sony.
Yeah.
If I wasn't, I would definitely be looking at Nikon personally, between Nikon and Nikon.
I think that's a fair shout. So when we do finally wind our business up, which we're planning to do May 26, obviously we still want to be photographers, but probably not, we might do the odd wedding. So we've got a big job to do to decide what we want, because we've got 4 cameras. We've got God knows how many lenses. And, I probably don't need, wide aperture GM lenses for the kind of photography I'm going to want to do, because I love street photography. I like doing sport photography. So 70 to 200 might be worthwhile, but we're quite looking forward to that time, because by then all our gear will be written off, so we can really go shopping and decide, what we would like for us to move forward, really. So, May 26th we'll be out there patrolling the camera shops. The only other camera that I use on a regular basis, and it's completely different to what we've been talking to, is a Ricoh GR3X.
Oh yes, yeah, I forgot you have one of
those.
And
I love it. I absolutely love it, and it's my little street photography camera. It's incredibly annoying in many ways because there's no viewfinder. The LCD at the back of it is not great. Focusing is average. In fact, when I use it on the street, I tend to use what they call, I forgot what they call it now, but you basically your distance focusing. Yeah. But I just love the fact it goes in a pocket. So if I go into London for the day and I want to walk around London and walk for 10, 12 miles or something like that, I don't look like a photographer. I can take pictures if I want to, or I can just enjoy the walk if I want to. But it just goes in my pocket, and I like the 40mm focal length as well as the equivalent lens. So especially new one of those coming out next year, GR4. But they're always in short supply. They're always hard to get hold of. They're incredibly overpriced for what they are because they're over $1,000. But it's just a nice little camera to carry around, really. It doesn't look like a proper camera, but the image quality, it's an APS-C camera. The image quality is really good.
You ever tempted to have a play with a Leica?
Oh, yeah. If I sell my soul to the devil, yeah. Yeah. So my mate Murray McMillan, who listens to this, we should get on the show sometime. He's a recent convert to Leica. He loves his Q3. Absolutely loves it.
I had somebody shoot a wedding with me recently on Leica, and they're great in black and white. I'm not mad on the raw files.
Interesting. Are they DNGs?
Yeah. It does DNG natively, doesn't it?
Yeah. Interesting.
Sort of quite noisy and not great contrast in there, but that may be loads of variables there. So and certainly I've seen photos of people that are Leica ambassadors and things, and they're creating fabulous pictures. So we were in a pretty dark church, so it was at the deep end. It's pretty. I was at ISO 4000 for most of it inside.
Was the Q3?
I think one was a Q. Is the Q3 a fixed lens?
Yeah, 35mm equivalent.
Oh no, it's just the Q. It's the Q. The one with it. They're both. Right.
I don't know what sensor's in those. Yeah, and the Q3, it's the same sensor as the Sony A7R4. It's a 61 meg.
Okay. Oh right.
Yeah, exactly the same sensor. Yeah. So.
No, it wasn't as big as that. The images aren't as big as that, so it must be a different one.
All right. Well, that's our whistle-stop tour around the world of camera gear, equipment and lenses. We're far from expert on all systems, but if you are about to splash out on a new camera system, dear listener, then you've got a hell of a choice. You've probably got the biggest choice anybody's ever had in the world of photography, really. So,
And the facts are they're probably all very similar, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, it's like you can't buy a bad car these days, can you? It's the same. They'll all do the job, won't they?
And so it probably does come down to the lens lineup, and that's why it is quite an odd decision for Canon at the moment.
Personal preferences, and one of the things I teach in sales training is that people buy for emotional reasons and then justify them for technical reasons.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. So, speaking of buying things for emotional reasons, let's just touch on the world of Apple for a moment, if we could. So you and I both have got Apple computers. You use Apple computers exclusively. I use a PC as well for my corporate training because it's just easier to be in the PC world for that, really. And I think one of the challenges I face is having a monitor that works for both of those systems. So, I could buy an Apple monitor, but then it doesn't necessarily play nicely with a Windows computer. There are workarounds, downloading drivers and things. But if I buy a Windows or a non-Apple monitor, there's the whole issue of scaling. Now, you're an IT person, I'm not, so you probably can explain it better than me. But my understanding is it's the way that Apple process or scale text. So if you plug an Apple computer into a non-Apple monitor, you tend to get quite big icons and big text. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd be honest with you, I'm not an expert on this at all, but I know it's to do with it certainly, because I've got a BenQ, I've got an iMac over this side, and a BenQ monitor here as well. So both off the same. And occasionally on the BenQ, normally it's completely crisp, but you'll get text that's just slightly fuzzy. It's like it's just gone one pixel out on the anti-aliasing system. And it's so where there's a straight edge, let's say on the left of a letter, like uppercase L, then that's anti-aliased, which it shouldn't be because that's not the point. It's a hard edge. And so, but then, once I've restarted it, it's fine. So there is something there, and I don't know what the difference is. I don't know why they do things differently.
There's a great article I can put in the show notes that I read about this a little while ago. So I'm currently using a widescreen Dell, a curved monitor, which has a 5K resolution along one side anyway. And if I plug this into the maximum resolution on the Mac, the icons and the text are just tiny. My eyesight is nowhere near good enough to read it, really. So what the Mac wants me to do is actually use it in half its normal resolution. And that's clear, but then you've got stonking great icons and things. And we've got another one upstairs, just a Dell 27 upstairs that Sam uses. And you can't read that with the Apple. It's just horrendous.
Oh, right. Yeah. I've maybe because I've got a BenQ. I mean, it's a few years old now, this BenQ. It's one of the sort of 2.5K rather than, 4 or 5K.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely fine. Apart from this occasional time where it does get this scaling a little bit wrong, moving things from the iMac onto there, like once they've calibrated, they're exactly the same. It's a brilliant monitor, and that's why I'm really interested in this. It's the PD 2730, so PD 2730S, which is that BenQ. So I'm really interested in that. And next year is another time when I'm probably looking at upgrading my system, my computer here.
Yeah.
I've got a M2 based MacBook Pro.
Yeah, same here.
But I'm a bit annoyed that because iMac isn't it's gone into the more of the consumer market. The iMac,
it's a 24-inch one, isn't it? Yeah.
You can't get the huge number of cores, and you can't spec them up anything like. So you're looking at a Pro or a Studio to get anything like the performance that I've got on this one. It's a bit annoying. So I will be needing two monitors. So that 5K BenQ.
Well, that's, I guess, really why I brought the topic up, because I think there's two new monitors. So at the moment, if you really want to get the optimum Apple resolution, you've either got to buy the 5K, £5,000 one, which is bonkers, the Studio display, which you've got to pay more for a proper stand and everything, or there was a LG, which I think has got the same panel, but that's a bit of an old monitor now. But there are two coming available. So there's the one you mentioned, the BenQ, I think it's the PD 2730S.
That's it, yeah.
And that's not, it's been previewed, but it's not officially available yet. But that has the Retina, if you don't want to call it that, resolution. And there's also an Asus that's available now, and that's the PA27JCV. Where do they get these model numbers from? And that's $750. And it's available now. You can get it in Wix, and it seems to have the same panel effectively as the Apple one. So, and it's Windows and Apple agnostic. So, I might look at one of those.
So when you say
the big screen,
when you say resolution, Steve, you're talking about like PPI.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's the PPI of the monitor.
Yeah.
So Apple monitors have got something like 218 PPI.
218, yeah. Most
other monitors are at the 150 or 160 mark. So if you really want to get the proper resolution of an Apple computer, you need a screen with so people mix up it's not 4K, 5K, it's the actual pixels per inch is what you got to look at. Really. Yeah, because 5K could be 3 meters high and then terrible resolution. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the BenQ and the Asus have both got the 218.
Apparently
PPI.
so.
Yeah.
I suspect it's the same panel because there's only 2 or 3 companies in the world that actually make panels. LG and Samsung being the main 2. So I suspect it's probably the same panel in all of them, really. But I thought it'd be an interesting point to look into.
Do you know why larger? Same for TVs as well. This used to be in the TV industry doing software, so that's how I know this.
Yeah, it is.
TVs and monitors, the reason they go up exponentially with size is because LCDs are created in huge sheets and there's just loads of imperfections. So they literally have to find the biggest. The bigger you go, the larger the sheet, the larger the area they have to find. So that they can only pick like maybe let's say 10 large sizes. The rest they have to pick smaller ones for iPads and things like that. So that's why they get loads of those without wasting any. But they waste quite a lot when they take big ones.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So that's my techie stuff for the week, really. So I'd be interested to see when those monitors say one's available now, but it's out of stock. But I think the BenQ will be the one to look at, certainly. And I might get 2 if I go that way, as you say, because I'm used to the wide screen. So
I wonder if that comes with this one I'm looking at now has got a hood, like an editing sort of hood that's quite.
I don't think so.
Useful.
No, don't think so.
I think this is the SW2700, which I think it might still be a thing, but it's been absolutely brilliant. I've had it for.
Oh yeah, BenQ's great. We used to have a BenQ.
Must be 5 years, 6 years, and it's on like 12 hours a day, and it's just as good as new. Really good.
No, they're really good. Really good monitors. So, okay, let's move on. I finally, as I said, got around to watching Lee last night.
And what did you think then? Let's have it.
Well, my wife is in tears, but that doesn't take a lot. She's Gets
Was that
really
before the
emotionally
cinema
attached to
though, or after?
No, it was my cooking, I think. We've sat and watched it on the Skybox. No, but she gets emotionally involved in TV and things. So I enjoyed it. They obviously cut a large chunk of her life out. They didn't mention anything about her early life. So, she was sexually abused as a child.
Yeah.
Her father used to take nude photos of her and things like that. So it didn't cover any of that at all, really. But I think it was well done, tastefully fun. I mean, she's brilliant in it for sure.
Yeah,
she's really good. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I think.
Okay. So I think I gave it a 8.
Okay.
I give it an 8. I just thought it was really. I liked the way they told the story, and to be honest, I didn't know much about her at all before the film, and then read more afterwards. So. The fact there were elements that weren't covered. But then I suppose if it's not a biopic, if it's not a full, biography of her life, which it didn't claim to be necessarily, then I suppose you can excuse, maybe they just felt that there were some bits that would take away from the fact that it was her photographic work and that kind of thing, which was the focus of it. Because she did loads of modelling as well, didn't she? Sort of like
she was a model before she became a photographer.
And they didn't cover huge amounts of that either. They referenced it, but it was all about the struggles that she had getting her images published. Firstly, getting the images, and then getting them published and being taken seriously.
Yeah, no, definitely worth watching if you haven't watched it, dear listener. And I've ordered a book for Sam actually of photos as well, so that'll be on the way. And speaking of books. Now, I haven't got this book because it's actually not available yet. But I was flicking through An Amateur Photographer at a news agency the other day. I haven't bought one of those for years, but I don't know why. I was just flicking through it. And they were talking about a book that's coming out from the Magnum agency, so obviously legendary photo agency. And there's a book coming out of, it's called Magnum America, and it's the United States series, basically. So it's a book of photos from Magnum photographers all about America. It's not just American photographers. So David Hearn and those kind of people are in as well. But what picture really took my eye was in the magazine. It's a photo by Alex Webb, whose photos I love. And it's a woman feeding a baby on a top of a building, and in the distance is Ground Zero, the 9/11 smoke all coming up. And of course, I was living in New York at the time, so I'm always very interested in that. And it was just a brilliant photo. So it looks a great book. It is 125 quid though. So I have to ask Santa if I'm going to get it. But it does look a fantastic book.
And who's that by?
It's Magnum. It's a Magnum agency.
It's Magnum.
Yeah, so it's all the Magnum photographers in there. So it looks a great book. It's about America through history, really, and their photos they've taken. So one to look out for, and one to ask Santa for, perhaps.
Yeah. My reading is still. I'm on the same, but I read a lot of mountaineering and exploration. So I'm currently reading a very weighty description of the history of Captain Scott and Roald Amundsen. Journey to the South Pole. So, and what is quite interesting about that Captain Scott sort of claimed to be Scott of the Antarctica and this heroic thing, most of which came from his own writing. He sort of describes himself like that.
Funny enough,
and this book really sort of talked more about what a bit of a bungling idiot, like a real, he is compared with, But so that's interesting, but not photography related at all. Other than some pretty beautiful descriptions of some of those scenes, which must have been amazing when you're the first set of eyes. Because you often find with books around exploring that people say, "Oh, we're the first humans to go there," and actually, what they mean is first Westerners to go there, because quite often there's been people there
white man
forever. But I think this probably was for sure being the first ever people to sort of see this stuff, and that there were some interesting photos taken of that.
Interesting, we complain about it being cold here. You can't imagine how cold that must have been.
minus 50, minus 60.
Wow. Doesn't make thinking about it, does it? Yeah. Well, one last topic from me, and it's topical right now following the American election, and I'm not going to get into politics. It's for the Americans to decide who they want to vote for. But have you decided to go on Blue Sky?
Well, it's a very interesting point you raise, actually, because I closed my Twitter or X account this week, at the weekend. partly because, so I used it for business a little bit, but it was mostly about, I was fully in the algorithm. I was getting fed lots of right-wing nonsense from, and you just react to it. And so I wouldn't react to it in abuse, but I'd react to it and say, well, hang on, what do you mean by woke? If you're going to say woke, bull, shit, what do you actually mean by that? What's and you never get any sensible thing, as
No.
And so you're trying to have these logical arguments, and people come back and just call you a lefty idiot, fine. But I got enough people obviously fed up with my responses. I got tired with being a spam account, and so they removed all my followers. I thought, well, do you know what? That's probably the push I needed. So that was fine. So I closed it down. I'm interested. I have downloaded the app for Blue Sky, which is, I think, the strapline for people that don't know. It's created. Do you know who created it? Who it's?
It's the ex-Twitter people. What's his name? Right. Dorsey, his name. So
yeah. So it's like it's. I think I read a tagline somewhere like a better place. So it's kind of. But will it just end up being the same? I don't know. I'm a bit cautious now of any echo chamber style platform. But I probably will give it a go and see. What about you? Are you still?
Yeah, I've just signed up this week. So we closed our Twitter accounts down about a month ago. I'm just exactly the same. I'm finding myself getting sucked into, the arguments and the hate and all the vitriol that's in there, and it's just a vile place, basically. And I was only on there. Well, we had a business account, but didn't do anything with it really. I was only on there really for sort of football gossip and things like that. And I just get sucked into all this stuff. And I think, why am I doing this? All I'm doing is just, feeding the machine, really. So I deleted both.
I totally agree.
And I have signed up for Blue Sky, and I haven't done anything on it much. I've said there's a few people I know. So if you do join, say hi.
I will do, yeah.
I did do Threads as well a while ago, but again, I haven't really done much with that one, really.
Yeah, same. I've realized, I looked at my Threads account a couple of days ago because not being on Twitter, and I've been posting loads of stuff. It must just be cross-posting from Instagram by default.
He does. It's a lot of good photography stuff on Threads. If you
and it does seem like a nicer. It's certainly a nicer vibe than X or Twitter. So I mean, hopefully Blue Sky will be as well. It's difficult with those things. I never know whether to create a business, make it an actual vehicle for the business, because what I have had on Twitter is, because it's got my web address and stuff in my profile. And people just leaving crap reviews, just saying, "Oh, this is a paedophile," for example. If you want a paedophile film, and that's because I might have questioned some transgender hate. It's completely random. So that seems to be their go-to thing, that you're that something like that. So and I think the person must have seen sense, because they either deleted it or Google deleted it. Probably the former, because Google haven't got a great history of deleting reviews. So I'm always cautious about, if I do have a business element to my profile, then do I then have to be a bit more careful about what I am saying and things like that, because you are representing your business as well, aren't you?
Yeah, completely.
And it's difficult if you work for IBM, say, then or a lot of companies, you are saying this is my opinions only. I don't, I'm not, this is not the company I work for. But when you're a sole trader or you're a limited company or you just work for yourself, then that's the same thing. So
it is exactly that. Yeah, you got to be careful not to destroy your brand, and that's a whole another topic for another day. Yeah. Before we wrap up, Nick, I know you've been doing a lot of work in the behind the scenes and getting some more guests coming up. So perhaps just say a few words about who's going to be coming on the show in the next few weeks.
Absolutely. So we have. It occurred to me that we have. We've had a landscape photographer. We had Neil and Helen, so sort of flash masters, and Geraint doing something, and photojournalist. One thing that I know that a few of our listeners are keen on is food photography, and there's a lot. That does seem to be a side that I'm seeing quite a lot of activity on in the market for new photographers. I guess it's one of those things where you can just, you can create a nice plate of food and in your home studio, you can shoot some beautiful shots. So it is something that is very accessible for people that start photography. But anyway, so we have got some exceptional food photographers coming on. So we've got Christian, they're both called Chris, which makes it easy. So there's Christian Barnett. And then we also have the other Chris, who I'm just going to remember which one the other Chris was.
Sorry, I dropped you in that. I should have phoned your audio. I was going to do that.
Chris Kirkham as well. Right. So, and they're both exceptional. They're both quite different, and they're both really well known. They've got the commissions and their portfolio is epic. So What we'll do is we've got one booked in. We'll give a bit of a gap so we're not sort of bookending 2 episodes.
Well, it is Christmas, so food is quite a good thing to be talking about, I suppose.
That's true enough. Yeah, that's true enough.
Soon be Christmas, not Christmas yet.
So I think that one's on that would probably be one of the records just before Christmas. So I'm guessing around Christmas time. But we've released that. So that should be good. Great.
And as you said earlier, Nick, if you do have anybody you'd like us to come on, dear listener, or an idea of a type of photography you'd like us to interview, or even would like to come on yourself, then we'd love to hear from you. You can obviously contact us through the Facebook group. There is an email address on Nick's webpage, I believe, as well, with the page for the podcast. And there is also now on, I think it comes up on Apple, you can message the show directly. I think it's a text, but you can message the show directly. So what you got planned for next week before our next show?
I seem to have a lot of commercial shoots at the moment. I've got a wedding as well coming up. I'm off to Anglesey tomorrow to shoot a couple of properties there. So I'm a bit worried about the horrible weather that's on northeast Wales because my sat-nav all seems to take me that way. But other than that, so that's always a really long day, but it's mostly driving. So it is a great time. That's my podcast time. So keep uploading podcasts and get those on. A few properties to shoot, a couple of studio things and some coaching coming up as well. I've got wedding photography coaching 2-day course in December, 14th to 15th. So people, there is, I think, 2 spaces left. So if anyone's interested, then let me know. What about you?
Quite a weekend. No photography for me this weekend. I'm going down to Cardiff the weekend after next for a rock concert, would you believe, or a rock festival. I'm going to Planet Rockstock. So Planet Rock is a digital radio station, and me and an old university mate of mine, we're going down. It's 3 nights, and it's actually in a holiday park in South Wales. So we're going to be sleeping in a caravan, watching old rock bands, probably drinking beer and eating curries. It sounds very rock and roll. But
who's headlining?
To it. Uriah Heep, would you believe?
Excellent. That's one for the younger listener, isn't it?
It is, yes. But there's also some bands people will have heard of as well. A band I particularly like called Robert John and the Wreck.
Right, cool.
Quite a sort of up-and-coming American sort of southern bluesy kind of band, even though they go from California. Anyway, let's wind things up. Great to see you again, Nick.
You too.
Enjoyed the chat today. If you would like to make sure you get the episodes every time, dear listener, then make sure you subscribe to the show. You can subscribe in all the main podcast apps like Apple, Spotify, and so on. If you've got any feedback for us, good or bad or indifferent, we can hear it as well. Please contact us directly.
And I've got a good. I've got I talked about a prize for the first Apple review. I've got a decent prize now. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's not. Remember I said before, it won't be a camera.
Okay.
Neither will it be a packet of crisps. It'll be somewhere in between. But it's closer to the former. It's not rubbish. It's good. So get a good review in.
So you heard that, dear listener. Make sure you leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify. We'd be eternally grateful, and Nick has a nice present for you as well. So, and it's not even Christmas yet.
Exactly.
We'll be back in again in a couple of weeks' time, folks. Until then, happy shooting out there, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.